Welcome to another GCN Tech Clinic where we aim to answer your bike-related and tech-related questions. If you've not watched before, you can submit your questions using the hashtag AskGCNTech in the comments section down below and also on social media. So keep your questions coming in. First up, let's dive straight in. Moses Palacios, he has a question. How do you know when it's time to add more sealant to tubeless tyres? I've got tubeless on all my bikes now, and I love it. Now, unfortunately, this is one of those questions that's a bit like, how long is a piece of string? It depends on a variety of factors, such as the conditions that you ride in, the type of sealant that you use, and all sorts of stuff, and how often you ride as well. So there isn't a sort of set time. If I was gonna give a ballpark figure, I'd say it's a good idea to probably change it every 4 months. That's what I would tend to do. But you can also check the status of your sealant using a crafty method. So it's a bit like when you check the oil level on your car. If you rotate your wheel into the lowest position with the valve at the bottom, deflate it and remove the valve core, what happens is all the free running sealant that's still liquid and hasn't congealed will go to the bottom of the tyre, just where the valve core is. And then at that point you can insert a stick or something nice and thin through the valve core as like a dipstick and then pull it out. And what you're looking for is wet, still liquid sealant on the end of that makeshift dipstick. If your sealant is all dry and congealed, you won't get that on the end when you dip it. So that's a good idea. That gives you an indication that you need to refresh your sealant if that's the case. I hope that helps and answers your question. Next question is from Adamos Virginiamos. That rhymes. Can I change my road bike's wheels with gravel bike wheels for better rides in the gravelly mountains? He says he's got a Cannondale CAD Optimo. Well, unfortunately, I don't know what the tyre clearance is on that bike and every other bike because I'm not Rain Man. It's a shame. If I was, I'd be winning loads of money at blackjack. But what I would suggest you do is simply look on the website for your bike, whatever bike that is. This matters for other people as well. And just look at what the maximum tyre clearance is, as that will be your biggest issue. If you've only got up to, say, 32 millimeters tyre clearance on your bike, then you're going to struggle to fit gravel tyres in there because gravel tyres tend to start at about that. But then in addition to a normal slick road tyre, they have knobbly bits on them, which I find can then catch quite easily within the frame. So yeah, you're probably going to struggle. And then you risk damaging your frame as well. If it's really, really, really tight, even if you can just about get something in, as soon as you start to get dirt and debris building up on the inside of a road frame there in that tight gap, the tyre's then rubbing against that and it's kind of like sandpaper against your frame. So when you have tyre clearance in a gravel bike, it's normally way more than the width of the tyre, even on a big tyre. For that reason, it's to allow dirt clearance. Next question is from Just Go Travel. He says, can you explain a bit about the reserve bikes? Do the riders have their own individual ones? And how do they handle giving the riders their reserve bike? I understand there's also a neutral service car in the race with bikes on, so how do the riders adjust to that kind of bike, and what impact does it have on the rider? Well, there's a number of things that can happen. So often a rider will have a teammate nearby them in the race because that's useful. Say if they are the leader and they have a problem and their teammate's a similar sized bike, the teammate will often sacrifice themselves and just get off and say, take my bike, go save yourself. And that's happened quite a lot of times before in the past and is a useful reason to have a teammate with you at a key moment in a race. The other thing that can happen is they get a bike from the team car, but sometimes the team car is quite far away. And so if the team car is not available, they can take a neutral service bike as well from Shimano in the Giro d'Italia or Mavic in the Tour de France. And those bikes are equipped with different pedal systems on them. Now we saw famously Chris Froome had to run because the bike he got had the wrong pedals on it. It had, I believe, Look pedals and he was riding Shimano pedals and so he couldn't clip in. But following that, actually now the neutral service bikes come with a range of pedal systems on them so that should a rider get them, they can get the one that has the pedals that they need. The other key thing on the neutral service bikes that we've seen before is they actually have dropper posts in them that are the same as what you'd get on a mountain bike, and these are controlled by a button on the handlebars. And so a rider can jump on the neutral service bike, press the dropper post to sort of get the seat height as they want it, and then they can carry on riding. But no one would want to ride a full tour or a full stage on a neutral service bike. They're kind of just like an emergency last-ditch thing to keep the rider going. But yes, in answer to your other bit of the question, all the riders in a team have a specific spare bike on the car that's their size and set up for them. And the team leaders will actually often have their bikes on the edge of the roof rack in the most accessible position, because they're the riders that need it the quickest. They're the most important within the context of the race. So yeah, hope that answers your question. Good question. Next question is from Konstantinos Velauras. I think I got that right. Anyway, he says, why do Tour de France teams not all use aero bikes on flat stages that are ideal for sprinters? That's a good question, and there's a number of reasons for it. The first one is that just because a rider is in the Tour de France doesn't mean that they're infallible. They're human, and they don't always make the best decision. And there is an argument that certain riders, I believe, should definitely be using aero bikes on those stages that aren't. The other reason, because they are faster, the other reason is that sometimes a rider will, have a preference for riding a certain frame because they prefer the comfort of it and the way it feels, and they get used to it. And the aero bike can differ in geometry from the climbing bike in that particular bike sponsor's range, and so they feel that they're kind of out of tune on it, or they're not quite in tune with the handling when they get on the slightly different geometry bike, and they prefer to just stick with one. So that's, I think, a valid reason for doing it as well. But they're probably the two kind of biggest reasons, that it's dependent from person to person, really. We do see some bike manufacturers, such as Trek, make a real effort to have the same geometry on their aero bike, the Madone, as they do on the Emonda climbing bike. And so we have seen quite often in the past riders routinely switch from the aero bike to the climbing bike, depending on the type of stage they're riding. Bauke Mollema is a rider that is often seen to do that. So yeah, some do. Padrake says, I have a Bianchi Ultra XR3 with externally routed disc brake cables. I was thinking about upgrading to internally routed cables and stem, such as a Vision Metron handlebar and stem. Can externally routed cables be converted to internally routed? Yes, they can through the bar, but you can't route them internally through the head tube. So that's dependent on the bike. More modern bikes are getting more internal routing through the head tube area, but the kind of previous generation of aero bikes, like the XR3, tend to have cables that are routed through the fork for the front disc brake, and then through the down tube for the rear disc brake or caliper brake, and then they tend to come out somewhere around the head tube and then go to the shifters. What you could do is have an internally routed stem where the cables come out of the head tube and then into the stem somewhere around here, and then go through the bars nice and neat and clean, but you will have a little bit of cable coming out here, but that's still pretty common on bikes anyway and looks really neat. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. Adam Ambrose has a tyre pressure question. He says, how much do tyre pressures rise after a riding session? E.g. in car tyres, this is a big deal. Cold pressure versus hot. Is it an issue for bikes as well? Well, tyre temperature does actually rise on bikes as you ride them. This is something that I've seen be measured on the track, and actually rolling resistance is initially higher when the tyre's cold and then does drop off after a few minutes of riding, but then kind of like stabilizes and normalizes. What you tend to find is the biggest impact on tyre pressure changes for bike tyres, in my experience, is actually the ambient temperature of the air. So if you're on a very, very hot day, say if you've pumped up your tyres to 100 psi first thing in the morning and it was really, really cold, like the air temperature was 6 degrees, and then you ride all day and by lunchtime it's 30 degrees, your your tyres are going to inflate much more and maybe be too high a pressure. I've actually seen before, it's a triathlon during my Tri-Curious days, don't ask, that I saw it was a particularly hot day and a load of triathletes put their bikes in the transition area and they pumped up their tyres to reduce rolling resistance to like 200 psi, and then they were sat in this really hot transition area, and then all of a sudden there was this kind of like just going around all over the place as people's tyres were exploding because they'd pumped them up too much, and then the sun had baked them and heated them up and they were all popping all over the place. So a lot of people came out of the swim to find that they had no air in their tyres. So there you go. Don't be like a triathlete. I jest. Last question this week is from Wout van Roy, who says he's running 105 disc, that's Shimano 105 disc, great group set, but he doesn't really like the look of the rotors. When they're worn out, can I replace them with Ultegra ones? Thanks and greetings from Belgium. Belgium was the last foreign country I went to before lockdown. Nice. Anyway, yes, to answer your question, you can. Shimano disc brake rotors are pretty much all cross-compatible. Just need to make sure you've got, center lock ones if you've got center lock ones already. I've actually swapped the rotors out on my old Bayer. You can see behind me, I had Dura Ace ones on there, but they were pretty worn out and I needed some new ones anyway. So I've swapped them for the new XTR ones, which I saw a lot of the pros using at the Tour de France. So I wanted to see what the fuss was about. They're slightly lighter than Dura Ace ones, slightly less expensive as well, and slightly newer. Supposedly they dissipate heat better, but I've only had them on a day or so I can't really comment. But yeah, so these are mountain bike ones. You can even put mountain bike rotors on. Just make sure you get the diameter right as well. Don't buy some like 200mm rotors off a mountain bike. You really struggle to get them to fit on a road bike. But yeah, hope that answers your question, and make sure when you do upgrade your rotors, you submit that in the app and get it in the bike vault. That'd be good. The bell is lurking here. Well, I hope I've been able to answer your questions this week, and sorry if I've not got round to your specific question. If you do have a question, get it down in the comments below, and hopefully I'll get round to it in a future tech clinic. It's always a pleasure answering your questions, and yeah, I'll see you in the next tech clinic hopefully. But stay safe. Bye.